Welcome, Wastelander, to my radio station camp build video. When I knew that I wanted to build a radio station, I spent a long time looking for the perfect spot. I wanted someplace that was up in the Savage Divide on a mountaintop so there would be no obstruction for the signal, so something where you might actually see a real radio station built. I wanted to be next to the road and underneath one of these big power pylons, which looks a little bit like the large radio towers that old vintage radio stations would have been built under. And this is a perfect spot in just about every way. You can see that I'm located here next to a road in the Savage Divide. The only downside is I'm a little close to Monongah, and that means I occasionally do have to move my camp to risk getting nuked. If you come down this little pathway, I've added some bushes to kind of emphasize that, you can see my camp. This is WMMN Radio, and when I was building and designing this camp, I did some research into the real radio stations of Appalachia, and also just what vintage radio stations from the sort of 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s would have looked like. And this is actually a real radio station. It was built in 1928 in Real World, West Virginia, one of the very first radio stations to be built in the area, and it's still broadcasting today. It's actually located near the town of Fairmount, which is right next to Monongah, so that felt like a really perfect placement. And one of the things that I learned was that historical radio stations from the 40s and 50s actually included bomb shelters, because in the event that there was some sort of nuclear attack or other disaster, the local public would only be able to rely on the radio for updates and news about safety and what to do, and just updates on the general situation. And so they included these shelters as part of the radio station. And as soon as I read that, I knew that I had to include the Chinese Communist bunker in my radio station. The 50,000 watts that I have here, this is also a throwback to what real radio stations would have done. They often advertise this right on their buildings, because to this day, that is the strongest broadcast signal that a radio station can use. And so they would often advertise that they were broadcasting at 50,000 watts because that made them a more powerful radio signal. Because the real WMMN radio was built in 1928, I wanted to give my build a little bit of an older feel than the rest of sort of the Appalachian buildings that we've seen. So I wanted the interior to look a little bit more vintage, something more 20s and 30s than 50s and 60s. I know it's sort of a retro future, but I wanted that aesthetic. I should also say that I learned that call signs are named for real things, and so the WMMN comes from W. Matthew Mansfield Neely, who was named in honor of a former governor of West Virginia. So I nerded out a little bit on radio histories and West Virginian radio in particular. So if you come into the radio station, we've got our on-air signal here, and you can see I've got the asylum lights, which have a really nice vintage look, and the black floor tile. And this big open area is broken up into a couple of smaller areas by these dressers, which stitch together pretty nicely to make a countertop. The decorations in this little waiting area are inspired by Fallout 4. We've got our silver shroud here. For those of you who've played that game, you know it started off as a radio station story before it was on TV. We have a couple of advertisers as well. The sunken merge trick was used to build a large radio here. And the computer banks just make the whole thing look really nice and technical. That was really fun to add. We have a little break area here for our employees to grab a snack and keep hydrated with Nuka-Cola. To get to the communist bunker, I have this secret door here, which a lot of people seem to miss. They run right past it. And we have our decontamination arch, and you can see that the communist bunker goes right up against this floor base, which I was really happy about. And inside of our bunker, we have pretty much everything you would need to survive long-term in the wasteland in the event of a nuclear disaster. We don't have a whole lot of privacy, so toilets just hidden by a couple of curtains here. And we've got two beds. Daguerre's bed is here with a space theme, And those of you who have seen some of my other videos will know that my character has a preference for nature, and so I've got a little wildlife-themed bed there. I thought about using Raider Punk for this build, but I've used him in a couple of camps in the past, and I wanted to try something different. I actually wanted to use the musician, but she drove me crazy after about 5 minutes. So we've got our two studios here, Studio 1 and 2, and this is also inspired by something that I found in some of the photos that I was looking at of the older radio stations. This one's designed to be a music studio, so live performances were a big thing in radio back in the day. A lot of radio stations would even have organs or pianos, and people would just come in and play music on the air, and so that's the studio for music. And then for the news and broadcasting studio, I wanted it to have a cluttered look, so there's almost a collage effect with local businesses, advertisements, and posters and other things. And this is a sort of place where you would interview local sports teams and other folks who were newsworthy, and you can see everyone through the broadcast window here. So here's Daguerre taking care of our radio station while we're doing this tour. Then we've got a bathroom here, keeping with that vintage theme, sort of 1920s, 30s look, reflecting that older period. And for this last little room, I just wanted something that would be a break room. We have our radio schedule up here on the chalkboard, a little spot to take a nap, and places where our radio licenses and files and other things are. And if you follow me towards the back, I knew I wanted a workshop space. I wanted it to look like a place where maybe you would work on the antennas or the radio equipment. So I don't have everything here. There's no chem bench, for example, but it's a pretty fully functional workshop surrounded by the communist fence, so the local hoodlums don't steal your tools. And I built this before the update, so I still had all 4 of my vending machines, and for a build like this, I didn't want the vending machines just to be stuck there, so I hid them behind these windows so they kind of resemble equipment in some kind of a tower. Maybe there's some sort of generators or something up here. And we also have power armor station, my fusion generator, and a nice little spot for relaxing at the end of a long day. And the last little bit I have here is, if you follow me towards the back, I built a small little garden to keep Daguerre busy and just give us some fresh produce as we diligently spend our time informing the wasteland of any important news updates and keeping fun music on the airwaves. So thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a really fun build to make, and I also really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the history of the real world West Virginia.